The newspaper sits on a kitchen table in suburban Virginia, still warm from the printing press. It's a Tuesday morning in March 1987, and to anyone glancing at page 23 of the Washington Post Classifieds, there's nothing unusual about the small advertisement nestled between offers for used furniture and piano lessons.
For sale, antique clock collection, German craftsmanship, serious inquiries only, box 4721. But in windowless office 3 miles away at CIA headquarters in Langley, a cryptanalyst named Sarah Morrison stares at those same words with her pulse quickening. She's been tracking patterns in classified advertisements for 6 months, and this morning, everything clicks into place. The German craftsmanship isn't describing clocks, it's describing the nationality of an intelligence officer. The box number, 4721, corresponds to a date, April 7, 1921, the birth date of a suspected East German intelligence operative. Morrison reaches for her secure phone. Within hours, one of the most sophisticated espionage networks in Cold War history will begin to unravel, all because someone learned to read between the lines. To understand how classified ads became the battlefield for one of espionage's greatest cat-and-mouse games, we need to go back to the fundamental problem that has plagued spies since the beginning of intelligence work: secure communication. During the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, technology had made traditional dead drops in face-to-face meetings increasingly dangerous. Surveillance cameras proliferated. Satellite imagery could track movements. Electronic eavesdropping had become sophisticated enough to monitor virtually any phone conversation. Intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain needed new methods of communication, ways to pass messages in plain sight, hidden within the mundane fabric of everyday life. The solution was elegant in its simplicity: steganography, the art of hiding messages in innocent-looking content. And what could be more innocent, more overlooked, more perfectly camouflaged than the classified advertisement section of a major newspaper? Thousands of ads appeared daily, people selling cars, seeking roommates, advertising garage sales. The sheer volume created the perfect haystack in which to hide needles of intelligence. Better still, newspapers were public, accessible to anyone, impossible to intercept or trace. A Soviet operative could send a message to their handler simply by placing an ad, and their handler could read it over breakfast at a cafe, surrounded by witnesses, in perfect safety. For years, this system worked flawlessly.
Sarah Morrison didn't set out to become a codebreaker. Born in 1952 in Cleveland, Ohio, she grew up fascinated by puzzles, crosswords, cryptograms, anything that challenged her to find hidden meanings. Her father, an engineer, would leave mathematical riddles for her at the breakfast table. Her mother, a librarian, introduced her to the works of Edgar Allan Poe, including The Gold Bug, his story about breaking a cipher to find buried treasure. At MIT in the early 1970s, Morrison studied mathematics and computer science, graduating at the top of her class. She joined the CIA in 1976, initially working in the Technical Analysis Division, helping to develop early computer systems for pattern recognition. It was tedious work, feeding punch cards into massive mainframes, analyzing data that seemed to lead nowhere. But Morrison possessed a rare gift: the ability to see connections that others missed. While her colleagues looked for obvious patterns, she intuited the subtle ones, the anomalies, the slight deviations from randomness that suggested human intention rather than chance. In 1985, the CIA faced a crisis. Intelligence assets were disappearing across Eastern Europe. Operatives who had worked for the West for years were suddenly going silent. Some were arrested, others simply vanished. The agency knew they had a leak, but they couldn't identify its source. Morrison was part of a task force assembled to investigate every possible communication channel that might have been compromised. While others focused on electronic intercepts and suspected moles within the agency, Morrison made a suggestion that seemed almost quaint. What if someone was using classified ads to communicate? Her superiors were skeptical.
Classified ads? It seemed too simple, too exposed. But Morrison argued that was precisely the point. If you want to hide a book, put it in a library, she said. She was given a small team and permission to investigate.
For 6 months, Morrison and her team collected classified advertisements from major newspapers across the United States and Western Europe. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Times of London, Le Monde in Paris, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany. They focused on the period from 1983 to 1986, the years when CIA assets had started disappearing. The volume was staggering, hundreds of thousands of ads. Morrison knew that manually reviewing each one was impossible. Instead, she approached it like a mathematician. She built a database, primitive by today's standards but cutting edge for 1986, and began looking for statistical anomalies. First, she filtered for specific categories, ads selling items that seemed unusual or out of place, antique clocks, rare books, musical instruments, coins, items that could be described with detailed specifications that might encode information. Then she looked at timing patterns. Were certain types of ads appearing in clusters around dates when intelligence operations had been compromised? Were there repeated box numbers or phone contacts? For weeks, nothing stood out. The data looked random because it largely was random. Real people genuinely selling genuine items. The noise overwhelmed any potential signal. But Morrison refined her approach. She realized that whoever was using the ads would need a system that seemed natural, ads that wouldn't draw attention even upon close inspection. So she started looking not at the ads themselves, but at the advertisers. Were any box numbers or contact methods appearing repeatedly? Were there patterns in the language used, certain phrases that appeared more frequently than statistical probability would suggest? That's when she noticed something curious.
Over a 3-year period, 17 classified ads in the Washington Post had used the exact phrase, German craftsmanship. On the surface, this wasn't extraordinary. German engineering and craftsmanship were widely respected. But Morrison's statistical analysis revealed something intriguing. The phrase appeared 340% more frequently in these ads than in comparable publications. More tellingly, these ads had appeared in a specific temporal pattern. 12 of the 17 had been published within a 2-week window of significant intelligence compromises. The correlation was too strong to be coincidental. Morrison dug deeper. The German craftsmanship ads were advertising different items, clocks, furniture, tools, musical instruments, but they shared certain linguistic quirks. The syntax was subtly unusual, with sentence structures that, while not grammatically incorrect, weren't quite natural for native English speakers. Small things, serious inquiries only, instead of the more common serious buyers only. The placement of adjectives that suggested someone thinking in German syntax. Then she made the breakthrough. Each ad included numbers, prices, box numbers, or reference codes. When she extracted these numbers and arranged them chronologically, she saw that they formed sequences. Not obvious patterns, that would have been too risky, but sequences that deviated from the random distribution she would expect to see. Morrison applied frequency analysis, the same technique used to break substitution ciphers for centuries. If these numbers were encoding information, certain digits should appear more frequently than others, just as the letter E appears most frequently in English text. The analysis confirmed her suspicion. The distribution was non-random. These ads weren't just ads, they were messages.
With this insight, Morrison's team shifted from statistical analysis to traditional cryptanalysis. They had evidence of a code but needed to understand the cipher system. Intelligence work relies heavily on knowing your adversary. Morrison studied East German intelligence methodology, particularly the Stasi and HVA, Hauptverwaltung Aufklärung, the Foreign Intelligence Division. She learned about their training, their operational patterns, their communication protocols. The HVA was known for sophisticated but not overcomplicated systems. They favored methods that were reliable and difficult to detect over systems that were theoretically unbreakable but operationally risky. A classified ad system would fit their operational philosophy perfectly. Morrison theorized that the cipher was probably a book code, a classic method where numbers referred to specific words in an agreed-upon text. Both sender and receiver would need the same edition of the same book. The numbers in the ads would correspond to page numbers, line numbers, and word positions. But which book? It would need to be commonly available in both the United States and East Germany, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion if found in someone's possession. A dictionary? Too obvious. A Bible? Possible, but with too many different versions. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. An analyst on Morrison's team, David Chen, had been reviewing the possessions of a suspected Eastern Bloc operative who had been arrested 6 months earlier. Among his belongings, a German-English dictionary, a perfectly normal item for someone working internationally. But this wasn't just any dictionary. It was a specific edition, Langenscheid's Standard Dictionary, German-English, published in 1982. Chen brought it to Morrison's attention because the arrested operative had annotated it heavily, though the annotations seemed to be just vocabulary notes.
Morrison's intuition flared. She obtained the same edition and began testing it against the numbers from the classified ads. Using different possible systems, page numbers, entry numbers, word positions, she tried to extract messages. Hours turned into days. False starts and dead ends multiplied. The team was exhausted, running on coffee and determination. Then, late on a Friday evening, Morrison tried a variation. What if the first number indicated the page, the second number the entry counting from the top of that page, and the third number the word within that entry? She applied this to the most recent German craftsmanship ad, which had advertised an antique clock for $475, contact box 4721. Page 47, fifth entry, first word, Lieferung, delivery. Her hands trembled as she checked the box number with different interpretations. If 4721 was split as 4721, page 4, seventh entry, 21st word, April. And if she treated the date the ad was published, March 15th, as part of the code, indicating when the delivery would occur, suddenly, fragments of intelligence started making sense. Meetings that had been compromised, operations that had been anticipated by the other side. The dates aligned. Morrison reached for the secure phone. It was time to brief the counterintelligence division. Armed with Morrison's decryption key, the CIA's counterintelligence team began systematically decoding every suspicious classified ad from the previous 3 years. What emerged was a portrait of a sophisticated espionage network that had been operating with impunity in the heart of American intelligence. The network consisted of at least 6 individuals, a combination of ideologically motivated volunteers and recruited assets. They weren't traditional deep cover agents. Instead, they were opportunistic intelligence gatherers, a Department of Defense contractor with security clearance, a State Department translator, a National Security Agency clerk, and others with access to sensitive information, but not high profile enough to attract intensive scrutiny. Their controller was an HVA officer operating out of the East German mission to the United Nations in New York. He never met with his assets directly. Instead, the entire operation ran through classified advertisements and a sophisticated system that had evolved over several years.
Here's how it worked. An asset would gather intelligence and encode key information using the agreed-upon dictionary. They would then place a classified ad advertising something appropriate to the message's content. An ad for German craftsmanship indicated the intelligence came from a German language source. An ad for rare books suggested documentary intelligence. Musical instruments indicated communications intercepts. The encoded message would be embedded in the numbers within the ad: price, box number, phone number, or item specifications. The HVA controller would read the ad in the newspaper, decode the message using his copy of the dictionary, and then send instructions back through another ad in the same or a different publication. The brilliance of the system was its layered security. Even if one ad was noticed, it appeared innocent. Even if the pattern was detected, breaking the code required knowing which book cipher was being used. Even if the code was broken, the advertisers used different names and contact methods for each ad, making it difficult to establish a pattern of behavior. But the system had one critical vulnerability. It assumed no one would look at the entire pattern over time. Once Morrison did that, when she saw the forest rather than the trees, the whole structure became visible. The FBI's counterintelligence division, working closely with the CIA, faced a delicate decision. They could arrest the network immediately, but that would only capture the operatives they'd already identified. Better to monitor the communication system, decode future messages, and map the entire network. For 3 months in the spring of 1987, the FBI watched as the espionage network continued operating, unaware they'd been compromised. Every classified ad was monitored, every message was decoded, every meeting location was surveilled. The operation required extraordinary discipline. Dozens of FBI agents had to resist the urge to intervene as they watched American intelligence being systematically betrayed. But they waited, building an airtight case, identifying every participant, documenting every transaction.
The arrests came simultaneously on June 23, 1987. In a coordinated operation across 3 states, FBI agents took down 7 individuals, the 6 assets and 1 courier who had been passing documents. The raids yielded treasure troves of evidence, multiple copies of the Langenscheidt dictionary, thousands of dollars in cash, receipts that matched dates of classified ad publications, and classified documents that had been scheduled for transmission. The HVA controller in New York, protected by diplomatic immunity, was declared persona non grata and expelled from the United States. He returned to East Germany, where his career ended in disgrace, not for being caught, which could happen to any operative, but for allowing his network to be comprehensively compromised. The mathematics of espionage are precise. The human cost is incalculable. During the 3 years the spy network operated, their intelligence led directly or indirectly to the compromise of at least 17 CIA operations in Eastern Europe. 8 intelligence assets were arrested by the Stasi. Of those 8, 2 died in prison. 1 from medical neglect, 1 from suicide. 3 others served sentences exceeding 15 years in conditions that amounted to psychological torture. There were families destroyed. A Polish engineer who had provided technological intelligence about Soviet military systems was arrested based on information this network passed to the East Germans. His wife and 2 teenage children were interrogated repeatedly. When he was finally released after German reunification, he found that his son had developed severe anxiety disorder, and his daughter had cut off all contact with the family, unable to process the trauma. These weren't abstract casualties. They were real people who had trusted the United States, who had risked everything because they believed in freedom or democracy, or simply wanted to escape the oppression of totalitarian systems. Their betrayal was absolute. At the trial of the network's most senior member, the Department of Defense contractor, the prosecutor read from a letter written by one of the compromised Czech assets before his execution. "I am told I will die because information about me reached the wrong hands," he wrote. "I do not know who betrayed me, but I hope they understand that they have not just betrayed one man. They have betrayed the idea that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. That is the greater crime."
The defense attorney argued that his client had been motivated by ideology, by a sincere belief that the United States was the aggressor in the Cold War, and that leveling the intelligence playing field was morally justified. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The contractor received a sentence of 45 years in federal prison. The others received sentences ranging from 15 to 35 years. Morrison's breakthrough revolutionized how intelligence agencies thought about covert communication in open sources. The CIA established a dedicated unit, eventually expanded to employ over 50 analysts, focused specifically on monitoring public communications for hidden messages. The methodology Morrison developed became foundational. Statistical analysis, combined with linguistic pattern recognition, applied at scale across multiple publications and languages. As technology advanced, the tools became more sophisticated. Computer systems that in 1987 required days to analyze data could by the early 1990s process the same information in hours. But adversaries adapted too. The dissolution of East Germany in 1990 revealed the full scope of HVA classified ad operations. Files recovered from Stasi headquarters showed that by 1988, aware their method had been compromised, they had shifted to even more sophisticated steganographic techniques. Messages hidden in digital images, in the white space of documents, in the metadata of computer files. The arms race continued, as it always does in intelligence work. For every new concealment technique, analysts developed new detection methods. For every detection method, operatives developed new concealment techniques. What remained constant was the fundamental principle Morrison had proven. In the information age, messages are everywhere, hidden in plain sight within the noise of everyday communication. The challenge isn't sending messages secretly, it's finding them among billions of innocuous transmissions.
The classified ads case forced intelligence agencies to confront uncomfortable questions about operational security and institutional culture. How had this network operated for 3 years without detection? Part of the answer was technological. The tools to analyze patterns across thousands of advertisements simply hadn't existed or hadn't been applied to this problem. But technology wasn't the whole story. The deeper issue was institutional mindset. Intelligence agencies had become so focused on sophisticated technical operations, satellite imagery, electronic surveillance, cryptographic analysis, that they'd overlooked simpler methods. There was an unspoken assumption that in the age of computers and satellites, spies wouldn't resort to something as antiquated as newspaper advertisements. This blind spot revealed a dangerous form of arrogance, the belief that because a technique seemed old-fashioned or low-tech, it must therefore be ineffective. The HFA had understood what CIA counterintelligence had temporarily forgotten, that the best hiding place is often the most obvious one, precisely because no one thinks to look there. The case also highlighted the critical importance of intellectual diversity in intelligence work. Morrison's background wasn't in traditional espionage. She was a mathematician and computer scientist who happened to work for the CIA. Her outsider perspective allowed her to see possibilities that career intelligence officers trained in conventional tradecraft had missed. After the case broke, the CIA and other intelligence agencies made deliberate efforts to recruit people with non-traditional backgrounds: data scientists, linguists, psychologists, even novelists and game designers. Anyone whose specialized knowledge might reveal patterns that conventional analysis would miss.
What makes classified ads so effective for espionage isn't just their ubiquity, but their psychology. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, but we're also overwhelmed by information. Our brains have evolved to filter out the vast majority of stimuli we encounter, focusing only on what seems immediately relevant. Classified ads exploit this filtering mechanism perfectly. When you flip through a newspaper, your brain categorizes the classified section as not for me, unless you're actively looking to buy a car or find an apartment. Even if you do read the ads, you process them superficially, extracting only the gist of each message. This psychological invisibility is what makes steganography so powerful. The message exists in a space that's technically public, anyone could see it, but functionally private because no one has reason to look closely. Morrison understood this intuitively. Her breakthrough wasn't just technical, it was psychological. She realized that to find hidden messages, you had to fight against your own brain's tendency to dismiss the mundane.
You had to look at classified ads not as a reader looking for a product, but as a skeptic looking for deception. This required a particular mindset, simultaneously suspicious and patient, willing to examine thousands of innocent-looking ads to find the handful that weren't innocent at all. It's exhausting work, cognitively demanding, requiring the analyst to maintain vigilance against the natural human tendency to see patterns where they none exist, while not missing real patterns when they appear. After the case concluded, Sarah Morrison became something of a legend within intelligence circles. She received the CIA's Intelligence Star, one of its highest honors, though the award ceremony was classified and the citation remained sealed. She continued working in counterintelligence for another 15 years, developing increasingly sophisticated methods for detecting covert communications. As the internet emerged and grew, she adapted her techniques to the digital realm, analyzing patterns in email headers, timing attacks, and steganographic techniques in digital images. But the classified ads case remained her most famous achievement, discussed in classified briefings at intelligence agencies around the world. When she retired in 2002, she left behind a legacy that extended far beyond one successful operation. She had demonstrated that in the intelligence world, the oldest techniques remained viable precisely because they were underestimated.
In her retirement, Morrison became a consultant, occasionally brought back to brief new analysts on pattern recognition and the psychology of hidden messages. She remained characteristically humble about her achievement. "I wasn't smarter than the people I was up against," she said in one of her few semi-public comments. "I just happened to ask a question nobody else was asking. What if we're looking in the wrong place? Sometimes the simplest question opens the door to everything." Today, more than 3 decades after Morrison's breakthrough, the classified ads case remains a cornerstone study in intelligence training programs. It's used to illustrate several fundamental principles. First, technological sophistication doesn't always equal operational security. The most elaborate systems can be defeated by the simplest ones if nobody's looking for them. Second, pattern recognition is both an art and a science. Morrison's statistical analysis provided the foundation, but her intuition, her sense of when a pattern was significant rather than coincidental, made the difference between raw data and actionable intelligence. Third, institutional humility matters. Organizations need to remain open to possibilities that don't fit their established frameworks. The CIA was willing to let Morrison pursue what seemed like a long-shot theory, and that willingness to tolerate unconventional thinking proved essential. Fourth, the human element remains central even in technical operations. Behind every coded message was a person making choices, experiencing stress, operating under pressure. Understanding human psychology, both the adversary's and your own, is as important as understanding mathematics and technology. The case also demonstrated something more subtle, that intelligence work, at its core, is about reading between the lines. Whether those lines are in a classified ad, an intercepted communication, or a diplomatic cable, the analyst's job is to find meaning that the author tried to hide or didn't realize they were revealing.
In the end, Morrison's greatest contribution may not have been catching one spy network, but demonstrating a way of thinking that remains essential in an age of information overload. Skeptical curiosity combined with analytical rigor. The willingness to question assumptions about where to look and what to find. The classified ads are gone now, replaced by Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. But the principles endure. Somewhere, right now, someone is hiding a message in plain sight. And somewhere else, an analyst like Sarah Morrison is learning to see it.